everyone, and welcome to Elevating Account Research, Next Gen Strategies for Revenue Growth. I'm your co-host, Elizabeth Italiano.
And I am Indu Sudhakar, also your co-host today.
And we are the co-creators of the Quest to Quota Attainment course. And this course is where your ROI is your commission check. But what we want it to do is to share some of the information and some of the best practices and tips via this webinar. So this is going to be a little bit of a few of the modules in the course that we have created. But we have seen these be so effective for CSMs, AMs, and AEs that we did not want to keep this just to ourselves. So we're sharing it with the broader audience. So thank you all for coming. So one of the foundational elements in the Quest to Quota course and in attaining your quota is really understanding your buyers and customers at the persona level. And this begins with account research. So this helps us to engage in a really compelling way with modern buyers and customers. It helps us to stay away from the fake personalization that is running rampant right now. So today we are sharing our modern day tactics that provide you with the foundation needed to cut through the noise and capture the attention of your target buyers and customers. So on that note, I am going to hand it over to Indu to kick us off.
Yes, thank you, Liz. So I think we've all been here where if you're a rep, whether it's on the CS side or the sales side, when you're doing research, you obviously know it's critical to making a great pitch that gets you into someone's inbox and opened, or a slide or presentation that's actually compelling. But what we find is that's not really the big challenge. The challenge is, how do I do all of this research without going down a huge rabbit hole and wasting hours of my time just to figure out random details that really don't serve anybody? So that's why we have put together what we call the PART framework. So basically, PART is a way to make sure all of the research that you're doing is anchoring back to a problem statement or a hypothesis, so that what you're researching is actually relevant to that end customer or that end prospect that you're trying to speak to. So PART essentially stands for, first, problem: what is the current problem that the prospect or customer has? Action: what is the action or solution that can be taken to rectify this problem? Result: what is the end result of actually solving this problem for the prospect or customer? And then finally, trigger: why is it important to solve this problem with my action and achieve this result right now? So we're going to be anchoring back to this framework throughout this webinar, and we do the same throughout our course, just to make sure we have the right filters on as we're doing our account research and starting to do outreach. And then one thing that I always hear from the sales reps as we talk about PART is, okay, well, it's great to have a framework, but I already use MEDDIC or BANT or SPICED or some other methodology internally. So is this supposed to replace that? And the answer is no. So they actually work pretty hand in hand. MEDDIC, what we found is it's really good for opportunity scoring. So for example, if you think about the E in MEDDIC, the economic buyer, that's very seller-centric. It helps you understand, okay, I have a solid deal because I know my economic buyer. But as someone trying to break into an inbox or expand to a new division of a company, that doesn't necessarily help you in account research for trying to break in the door. So that's where PART really comes in, because you're able to create a very compelling problem statement. And then once you're in the door, you can supplement that with frameworks like MEDDIC to ensure that opportunity stays strong. And there are a lot of correlations between the two frameworks. So for example, when you look at the results in PART, once you start to obtain some of that information, it actually helps you populate things like the metrics or decision criteria in MEDDIC. So they're very complementary in that sense. So what we want to do is quickly take you guys through, when we look at the PART framework, what does an example of that look like? And the idea is we're going to show you sort of the manual process today, and then we're going to show you the super next gen process that's going to speed things up for you. So when we look at the PART framework, we are typically bookending that process. We're looking at problem and trigger. And the reason is action and result. we kind of already know, like we're all or subject matter experts in our own product and our own solution. So articulating the action and results is relatively straightforward. The account research really comes in when it comes to the problem and trigger. So in this next slide, we'll show you an example of that. So hypothetically, pretend that I am a rep for a revenue intelligence software company called RevIntel, and I sell a call recording and analytics tool. And in this example, I am selling to a prospect called Martechco, who is a marketing technology platform. I know we're not super creative with the names here. In this example, I'm trying to figure out what a problem might be that Martechco has. So I might go and I look at the news and I see, okay, Martechco is steadily growing in revenue, impressive returns, yet they're having a really hard time getting to profitability. So with that little tidbit from news, I'm able to decipher, okay, so their expenses are kind of out of control if they can't get to profitability. And I know as a sales rep at RevIntel Co. that sales and marketing expenses is what we typically touch and where we create efficiencies. So I might go to their 10K from there and look at that sales and marketing expenses section and see, my goodness, from last year, they've actually had a 60% increase in sales and marketing spend, mainly on full-time employees, and that's not going to help their profitability at all. So I've gotten the problem statement at that point. Next, I'm going to move on to trigger. And maybe I head to LinkedIn and I look at the job listings and I see, my goodness, they're hiring a VP of sales for Americas for about 450 to 550K. That is expensive. And then on top of that, they have several VP of sales listings, as well as account executives and directors. And I see, okay, if they're hiring all these people right now, it's not going to help with their profitability. So the trigger we have now is, before you hire all these people, maybe you should consider a solution that actually creates efficiencies so you don't have to spend this much more money. So to piece this all together, based off of the research we've done, we can now look at our PART framework. So in this case, the problem we've defined is Martechco has grown its revenue significantly year over year. However, they've struggled to reach profitability due to rising OpEx spend, particularly on full-time employees and sales. And then we have our action and result, which is what we as reps should know based off of benchmarking, client stories, and so forth. So the action is, by using our call recording and AI summaries, Martechco can give 10 hours back to its sales leaders per week. And with the time that they're saving, they're able to pause hiring for 2 to 3 roles in leadership, and they can leverage the team that's already in place. The result of implementing this is it will eliminate 1.4 million in OpEx spend. Again, we're taking those salaries posted on LinkedIn and doing the math in terms of where they can eliminate hiring. Additionally, by being more automatically alerted of deal warnings because of our software, they can see an increase of 20% in revenue production and get closer to profitability. And finally, the trigger that we'd already discussed is profitability is a key goal for Martechco in 2024, but with all of these job openings, it's really a critical time now to get a solution in place before they start spending this much money again. So we have this full PART framework, and the idea is we can get here, sure, but reality is without using some of the modern day advents or some of the other tactics that we're going to share with you today, can take a really long time. So I'm going to hand it back over to Liz, who's going to walk you through some of the ways we can streamline this process a bit.
Yes, because I know from my experience, and I was an AE and an AM and CSM and also coaching teams, the account research was extremely time consuming. And this was the type of level of detail that I aimed to get to, but it took a lot of time. So we also want to stay away from fake personalization. And one of the things that we're seeing in the buyer process and even the customer process is that sellers or buyers don't want to engage with sellers as much as possible. And it's because they are expecting sellers and CSMs to understand their goals. There is a stat by HubSpot that was also shared that talked about 66% of buyers try to go as far as possible in the selling journey and their buying journey and not engage with sellers. And now we see this stat from Salesforce that 86% of business buyers are more likely to buy if companies understand their goals. And so right now, what we're seeing a lot in the market, and my LinkedIn, to be honest with you, my inbox is a bit of a dumpster fire with fake personalization. And I get it to some extent because, again, account research has historically been time consuming. And now we have all of these tools, these AI tools that are now perpetuating fake personalization by scraping surface level information and sending, again, those fake personalization messages. So we're going to talk about how to avoid that, but also not going down a rabbit hole of spending hours and hours and hours. So when you look at the old and ineffective way of account research, the basic is websites, LinkedIn, looking at past opportunities. And those are still things that we can and should do, but we want to, again, speed up this process and we want to be more effective and efficient with it. And we also want to stop or not be guilty of using that fake personalization. And also the other thing that we see is really long-winded emails, because people, those that do research, they'll see 5 different things that might be applicable and they put it all in one email, and it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. That isn't effective. Fake personalization and the long-winded emails, they'll get ignored. They will get put in trash or spam. So it begs the question of, okay, how do we get to our target prospects, our target customers? And so some of the modern day approaches is, one of them is finding where your prospects are hanging out online. So going to where they are and not avoiding completely email and LinkedIn, but avoiding that as your only means of engagement. The other aspect is in-person events. So this is something that, pre-COVID was, people were more in the habit of it. Now it's, starting to be one of the avenues where we can really connect with our personas as well. And even if it's not our direct prospects, but if they are representative of the persona, it's a huge learning opportunity to learn and see what resonates with those stakeholders. Then there's your network. So we don't want to use and abuse your network, but leverage it as much as possible. And of course, leveraging ChatGPT, which we are going to get into and spend the bulk of the second half of this webinar on ChatGPT. And what we want to do with all of this information, all of this learning and engaging with our prospects, our customers, and our communities is being able to develop hypothesis and problem statements at the persona level. So we go into this in a lot more detail in our persona persuasion course, but we wanted to call out this a little bit more in detail for the webinar around finding out where your prospects and customers are. So some of these are a bit obvious, LinkedIn comments and LinkedIn groups. LinkedIn is a phenomenal source of identifying who your prospects are, where they are, what they're talking about. Your network, as I had mentioned, but also communities and professional forums. So the disclaimer that I will add to all of these, and we get into more of the do's and don'ts in the course, but the biggest don't is to pitch slap, go into these communities, drop into somebody's LinkedIn comments and thread, and jump right to a generic pitch. We want to use these avenues and these forums to learn about what our personas and prospects and customers' problems are, what's trending, learn about the industry, and then we can start to engage and position ourselves as experts, learn, and then use that in personalization. But then this begs the question is, how do I find more specific communities? Okay, LinkedIn, that's, pretty broad, but how do I find more specific communities? And then how do I take my research and how do I do meaningful research that helps me develop my part and engage in a way that persuades without spending all of those hours and hours and hours that, typically, at least for myself, I used to spend in doing research. So this takes us to ChatGPT. So we have what we call our basic steps for layered prompting. So what we have found, and we are heavy users of ChatGPT and AI, and we've learned the do's and don'ts of ChatGPT and other AI tools. And today we're just going to focus on ChatGPT. And one of the do's is to set the stage and train ChatGPT. So I've seen a lot of, LinkedIn posts or recommendations of these like 1-2 line prompts, and they are good to start with. But where we want to move with ChatGPT is to train it on who we are, what we do. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's a screenshot, and this is taken from one of the modules in our account research course. And this is an example of how we have trained ChatGPT in a very specific use case company. And this is the level of detail that we start to put into ChatGPT. And it's a little time consuming up front. And by time consuming, I'm talking maybe like 20 minutes. But once you do it the first time, then you save that as a template or save it in ChatGPT, and then it speeds up the process from then on. So every time you go into ChatGPT and you start doing prompts, think about the level of detail and what you need to put into your prompt to train ChatGPT. And that will boost the quality of the responses that you get significantly. So these other steps here around synthesizing information using part, segmenting information, and creating problem statements and hypotheses, we're going to get into with very specific examples. So we have a bit of a crawl, walk, run approach in the examples that we're going to share. And again, keep in mind, for the purposes of of simplicity and not having too much to scroll through, we did start out with some pretty basic prompts in some of these examples, but we've already trained our ChatGPT before this as well. So again, just keep that in mind as you're looking, and you'll have access to all of the links of the chats that we'll be showing. So in this first example, we are going to pretend that we are a new AE at a revenue intelligence company, so Revintel Co. So think like Gong or Chorus or the like, and that we're starting to learn about the problems of CROs and CFOs, because we've identified those as two key personas that we're going to be selling into, and what problems that they have that they would expect revenue intelligence platforms like ours to help address. So in this case, you can see that it's giving us some pretty on point problems and pain points. So revenue forecasting accuracy, that has been one of the hottest topics of any CRO that I have talked to in the past year. So that's completely on point. Sales performance optimization. And so you can see here that it gives some level of detail. And again, this example is for someone who's new and we're trying to learn more about these particular personas. So I won't go through these line by line, just in the interest of time, but take time afterwards and go through these prompts, and you'll see how each level starts to dig deeper and deeper into the layers of our prompt. So then the next prompt that we have is that we want to pull in part. So if you think back to step 2 on the slide that I showed a few moments ago, we want to synthesize information into part. And then this will help us to create personalized messaging that's going to resonate. It'll help us engage with clients in a way that's going to be relevant to them. So we provided ChatGPT with what part is. So we've trained it on part, and it's broken down by the CRO and the CFO problems that they are facing, the actions that they can take using a revenue intelligence platform, results that they could expect to see, and the trigger. And the same for the CFO. So this starts to get us in sort of the mindset of the CRO and CFO, and we're starting to learn. Then we say, okay, well, this is good baseline, but we want to learn more and look at some other sources of information. So we ask ChatGPT, what are some communities and online places that these stakeholders participate in? And again, you can see here, Sales Hacker is a great one, Revenue Collective, SaaStr community, and then with CFO, it gives us some resources there as well. And then we dig a little further and we want to know specifically about podcasts and publications. So it tells us, okay, here are some avenues that you can use and listen to, communities. And now we know exactly where we need to go in order to find out where our prospects and customers are online and where we can learn more about these particular personas. So this is kind of the crawl version of ChatGPT prompts. The next one that we're going to talk about is annual reports and pulling information in a really succinct way from an annual report into parts and creating problem statements and hypothesis development. So let's pretend we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to pretend that we are a rep for a cybersecurity company. So in this case, we'll say CrowdStrike. And we are selling into Salesforce, or that is our goal, is that we want to prospect and sell into Salesforce. And by the way, we have no affiliation with either Salesforce or CrowdStrike. This is all public information. Anyway, so just wanted to add that disclaimer. So I go to the Salesforce website. So that's kind of old school way of doing it, starting to learn more about Salesforce. I want to look at their financials. Okay, this is a lot. So if you go into any of these annual reports, so say we want to compare changes year over year, I go into the annual report for fiscal year 2022, 135 pages. 2023, 132 pages. That is a lot. And now, thanks to ChatGPT, we can start to sift through this information and distill it down in a very quick amount of time. So what I did was in the free version of ChatGPT, you can't upload things. In the paid version, you can, and Indy will walk through that in a few moments. But in the free version, you can copy and paste certain sections. So there is a limit to how much you can copy and paste into ChatGPT. So what I have found very helpful is taking things like the opening few pages. So usually there's like a stockholder memo or letter, executive summary. And then there's often things like forward-looking statements that are added. So that's a good starting point and helps to identify trends. So you'll see here, I asked ChatGPT to, I explained my role, what I was doing, and what information that I'm looking for. And so I copied and pasted all of this into ChatGPT, and it gives me some pretty solid information. So if we look back to the annual report, this is pages and pages of information now distilled into very digestible pieces of information that I can start to look through. And so what are some things that are going to be relevant to me as a CrowdStrike rep that I can start to piece together for hypothesis development and problem statements. So we take a look here, we see that there's some key pieces of information that we can pull out, and we start to say, okay, now I want to dig a little bit further, and again, think of that layered prompting, and I want this to be broken down into financial performance and growth, profitability and margin, and transformation and restructuring. So ChatGPT now gives us a great summary analysis, and there's things that I am pulling out, which we'll go through in a moment, that I can use and put into part. So the next thing that I want to do is, okay, this is really helpful. So I want to also add a disclaimer that ChatGPT is not perfect, and we do need to make sure that we are paying attention to the prompts that we're putting in and the information that ChatGPT is giving to us. So the first time I went through this particular example, in the chat, I put in what is the forward-looking statement for their report and highlight what is relevant to CrowdStrike. So then what ChatGPT gave me was a summary but from like the CrowdStrike's point of view. So it took the prompt that I gave and it became about CrowdStrike's strategic focus. So basically, it conflated the two questions that I asked. So when you're putting these prompts into ChatGPT, be very specific. Don't put there. Put from Salesforce. Continue to be specific, and you won't end up with these sort of incorrect prompt responses as you just saw. So in this case, I added the forward-looking statement. And I asked it to put it into context around where CrowdStrike could help, and putting it into some positioning that I can actually attribute and use for problem statements and hypothesis development. And you can see here it does an excellent job of, now it's telling me, okay, based on the annual reports and the information, Salesforce acknowledges the necessity for maintaining security. Data centers is something that's mentioned, data privacy. So again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through this line by line, but this really gave me a lot of great information that I can start to work with. So now I need to synthesize this even further. And so you could think of this as a layers of hierarchy and levels of information. So now I'm asking it to put it into part. And so you can see, again, we trained ChatGPT on part. And now it's giving us a really succinct view broken out by different problems that we can start to work with. And you can ask it to dive in deeper, ask for more part breakdowns, whatever it is that you want to dig into. Then from there, I start to develop problem statements. Okay, so now let's focus on problem statements. Now, this is, think of, we started with two documents that were over 125 pages. And so now we've distilled it down into 5 really solid problem statements, but that only gets us part of the way. So the next step that we do is we use what we call an engagement logic map. And so the engagement logic map consists of 5 key components: macroeconomic components, company performance, industry compliance, competitive landscape, and customer health. Now, if you look back through the responses from ChatGPT and from the annual reports, there's 3 key themes that emerged. Company performance, they are focused on operational efficiency and profit margin. Industry compliance and privacy is another big one, and being competitive in a very competitive market is another. So then we start to break down and pull in some very specific information that we were able to isolate using ChatGPT and prompt. And so you can see here, there's the engagement logic buckets and then the focus areas. Now, this slide I know is a lot to read, but if you go back, once you get all of this material, you'll see that what is in the white blocks and in quotes are things that we pulled directly from the annual report, as well as some information that we pulled from ChatGPT. And then what we also did was we took some of the keywords and themes that ChatGPT gave us and was repeatedly talking about, and we did a search in the annual report, and we found that there was a bad actor and that they obtained unauthorized access to several databases within Salesforce. So that's a pretty key piece of information. And from there, we were able to take all of this information and distill it down into our hypothesis and our problem statement. And now this forms the basis of my prospecting message. Or this can also, if it's an existing client, form the basis for an EBR, or reaching out to new stakeholders that we're not engaged with but need to be engaged with. And now I can personalize my messaging, my engagement with these pieces of information in a very succinct way. So this took us less than a half hour to do. And we went from, again, 2 over 120-page documents to then going into these 2 succinct sections. So I know that we're at time, but we have one more example that we can cover. You'll get the recording if you need to jump, but Indu, I will hand it over to you to go over the 3rd example.
Yes. So yeah, if you guys need to jump, please feel free. We're sending this recording to everyone afterwards. What this example shows is if you're paying for the premium version of ChatGPT, which I think is like $20 a month, it simplifies this process even more. So instead of scouring certain portions of the annual report, you'll see here that I've just uploaded 2 different annual reports for a company, one from 2023 and one from 2022. And I've asked them to analyze what the financials are and what the discrepancies are between what was projected versus what the attainment was. So you'll see that ChatGPT is able to produce basically where the differences are. But it didn't get me to my problem statement necessarily. So I asked here, please review how the operating expenses have changed, knowing that that's a specific part of the financial statement that I can impact. And you can see here, we have the 3 lines that it's broken it out into. And just as our manual work got us to very quickly in like maybe 3 or 4 minutes, ChatGPT shows us, hey, sales and marketing expenses have increased. And then as we go on, we use the same layered prompting that Liz has mentioned to start to get a little bit more from ChatGPT. So a little bit reverse of order, but here I'm providing the context about who I am, what I sell, and looking for advice about what from these particular points that you've distilled would be beneficial with our solution for this company. And you can see ChatGPT again goes through revenue growth, increased operating expenses, things of that nature. And then here I tie it back to the PART framework. So instead of me, again, having to scour through an annual report to figure out what is even the problem here, I'm able to give context to ChatGPT to help me start figuring out a few different problems that I can go in with. We all know email's not a one and done, so it's actually nice to have different versions of PART. So if maybe that first email doesn't land, I have 2 or 3 alternatives in terms of problem statements I can attack with. So you see ChatGPT does a great job of spelling it out here. And then the last layer, which we love, the CFO is so involved in every opportunity now that companies are so focused on profitability. You can add that lens to ChatGPT. So now that I have all this information, I'm saying, okay, ChatGPT, now make this part relevant to someone like a CFO. And you can see it gets very focused on investments, financials, lifetime value, metrics that a CFO tends to care a lot more about. And it gives you sort of the vernacular and direction to start creating messaging and developing that problem statement. So anyone on the free plan considering the paid plan, this is definitely one of the advantages versus having to copy and paste. You're able to synthesize even more of that data very quickly to get to this point.
Yeah. And the other thing, if it's a company that's private and doesn't have public annual reports, you can identify and find different articles and compare that way. So whether it's turning it into a PDF or copying and pasting. So the annual report's the example that we use, but you can use any type of information to do the same type of analysis. So we hope that this gives you a good starting point for account research. We do have a course for account research, which we call 2024 Vision Account Savvy, which goes into more lessons on ChatGPT, more examples with PART, and persona-driven persuasion course, which is going to go live later this month, which starts getting into how to craft messaging. So taking everything from the account research that we've done today and what's in our course, and then how you actually create messaging. And we have PART cards and PART frameworks that's specific to stakeholders as well. So if you'd like to register for the course or sign up to be alerted about any of the upcoming courses, the link will be in the email and material that we send out, as will be this information. So this webinar is a great foundation for you to start with as well. So happy to take any questions from anybody that's still on. Otherwise,
we did
we'll
have one in the chat.
Okay.
So Brian says, with the growing importance of sustainability and social responsibility, how can account research strategies incorporate these factors to drive revenue growth while also making a positive impact? I have a couple of thoughts on this one. So in terms of, I think there's a privacy element to this. So you never want to put sensitive data into ChatGPT or use data that someone might be uncomfortable having manipulated or receive if they're looking at a message. And then when we talk about sustainability and sort of the environmental approach, I can speak to the experience of a client we had where it was a manufacturing company and they happened to have a more sustainable approach to manufacturing. So a great way to kind of weave together everything we talked about today is looking through those annual reports. A lot of times they will make mentions of environmental sustainability or goals and targets that they have that are really based around being a little bit more conscious of the environment and sort of their footprint, especially when you get into industries like that. So I think in the way that Liz had presented how you can use ChatGPT to pull out elements like finances or problem statements, you can also use ChatGPT to really scour what those different initiatives are that have more of a social responsibility focus without really detracting from your focus as a sales rep or a CSM trying to build that revenue. Liz, is there anything you would add there?
I think the other great use case is looking up what are the trends in the industry and what specific competitors are doing. So if you have a customer that is interested in sustainability or whatever the case may be, ChatGPT for competitive intel and industry intel is really great. So then you can go in and be that educator on that as well, and you can tell them what sort of trends that you're seeing in the industry that they might not be aware of. And then, you're positioning yourself as a thought leader, as a trusted advisor. So yeah, that's what I would add.
Great. Any other questions from the group?
Okay.
All right.
Well,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
We will be sending an email after this with, of course, the recording, the slide deck from today with all of the links, and the ChatGPT prompts and everything included in what we showed you will be there. If you do have any questions, it links directly back to Liz and myself, so please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to answer any questions or feedback that you guys have after the fact.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone, for joining.
Thanks all.
Bye.